Hi, folks. I haven't done one of these stories for a hell of a long time, really. But somebody on one of the Facebook pages, which is called Jordan Grand Prix Still Buzzing, reminded me today that it was 30 years ago that we did the French Grand Prix at Magny-Cours. And he also reminded me of the fact that the truck I was driving when I worked for Yamaha, which was the engine suppliers to Jordan, how we got held up in the French lorry drivers' strike. So I thought it'd just be, a fun sort of few minutes just to talk about what happened that day and what led up to it. Um, the truck that I drove for Yamaha was supplied by Yamaha. It was actually a Japanese truck, and for some strange reason, it was registered in Belgium. So what I had to do was a couple of days before I would normally leave to go to a Grand Prix meeting, I had to take the truck over to Belgium for its annual sort of not MOT test, but registration test and everything like that to comply with all the rules. So I drove over to Belgium, and I was there for a couple of days, and obviously, the next thing I got to do was drive off to the French Grand Prix. As I got south of Paris, crossed over the border into Belgium. I'd heard a few stories about the fact that the French lorry drivers were going on strike. And I believe at the time, I think it was something to do with the French lorry drivers and their working hours. And the French, being what they are very good at causing disruption for something that they don't agree with. So as I got over the border from Belgium into France, I started seeing these roadblocks everywhere, and it was you'd be going down maybe an A road rather than a motorway or something like that, and you'd come across tractors in the middle of the road, or there'd be load of burning tires and all that kind of thing, and it was just it's just something that the French the drivers wanted to highlight to the government that they were unhappy and they were going to cause maximum disruption. So I'm driving along, and I'm managing to avoid of all these things. But I get south of Paris, sort of between Paris and Magny-Cours, and I saw this roadblock again. And this driver stepped out into the road and waved me onto the sort of hard shoulder. And there was a lot of other trucks that were parked up, and lots of lorry drivers milling about and that sort of thing. And I thought, bloody hell, I'm going to be stuck here for an hour or so. I thought, well, I better do what I'm going to do. So I was parked up there for probably 2 or 3 hours, and I'm beginning to think, this is going to make me late getting down to the circuit. I was probably an hour and a half's drive from Magny-Cours. And so I got back in my truck, and I thought, I'm going to get out of here. And so I started to pull out into the road, and I'd got 4 or 5 of these big lorry drivers who were on this picket line started to approach me and started to point me back into back onto the hard shoulder, and I just kept carrying on. Just then, one guy jumped up to the side of the cab with a big iron bar and made it quite clear to me that if I didn't pull over, I was going to get a wallop with this iron bar. And he grabbed the key. He went in the window, grabbed the keys out of the ignition, I mean, it wasn't a very tall truck, the one I was driving. I'll show you a picture of it in a bit. But anyway, he put me back. He told me to park up, and they said in French, if you try to escape again, we will set fire to the truck. And that sort of concentrated my mind a little bit. Um, so they parked me up, and they parked me up behind this other British registered truck, who I recognised the driver was a pal of ours. There's a guy called Spencer Bate, and he got a 40-foot truck carrying all the BP fuel for the race. Now, Spence had been parked up there for a day or a couple of days or something before I arrived. So they put me behind Spence's Arctic, and they stuffed a load of tyres underneath my Yamaha truck, and they said, if you try to escape again, we will set fire to it. Now, I'm thinking, if they set fire to the truck, and in front of me I've got a 40-footer full of 45-gallon drums of BP fuel, this is going to make one hell of a bonfire. So, I sort of complied with it. We didn't have any mobile phones really in those days. I think I might have had one. I can't remember. But anyway, we made a phone call to the circuit to tell the Jordan guys what had happened, and I was stuck. I was going to be late. And I remember speaking to Tim Scott, who was he was sort of like the transport manager, team manager at Jordan. And he said, well, how long is it going to take you to get down here? And I said, Tim, I don't know. I said, I'm stuck here. So Tim and one or two others decided that they'd drive up to have a look at the situation. So as they, a couple of hours later, they arrived, and of course, you got to think. I've got all the race engines. I've probably got 8 or 9 race engines, all the computers for all the telemetry and everything like that. Everything that we needed to run the Jordan cars with our engines. And if we couldn't get them to the circuit, then we were going to be stuck. So Tim turned up, and I think possibly maybe John Boy Walton, and they had a look, and they says, what are we going to do? And we tried talking to one or two of the French drivers, and they said, no, the truck isn't moving. I think what it was, because it was obviously French Grand Prix week, and the drivers saw my truck in all its livery as a little bit of a bit of a prize for them. It looked a bit more shiny than the rest of the curtain siders and trailers. So it was made clear to us that the truck wasn't going to move, and we didn't know how long this strike was going to last. Well, myself and Tim, we got a little office in the back of the truck where I'd got like my clothes, my suitcase, and we were carrying a lot of spare trainers for the teams and that for the team gear. So myself and Tim got up in this office, and suddenly we heard this commotion, and the door was slammed shut on us, and we're stuck in this office in the pitch black. So there was one or two bits and pieces in the truck, and I found this big iron bar, and I started banging on the door, and I was going bloody mad, and eventually the door opened, and one of these drivers said, "You can take your personal gear and what have you, but you cannot take anything else from the truck for the race." There were a couple of girls who they were the hospitality girls for Brabham, who I'd worked with the year before. You'll see I don't have a Jordan shirt, but I have an old Brabham Yamaha shirt. Well, I knew these two girls from the hospitality bus, and they were going past just at the right time. Well, these two girls, Elodie and I can't remember the other girl's name, but they were both French. So they came over and started to translate with the lorry drivers, and they said, "Look, you know, you need to let these guys go. They've got to go to work." So that sort of seemed to pacify them a little bit, and we all got in a car and we went off to the circuit. And I'm in a bit of a bit of an angry mood about it. And as we got to the circuit and we walked into the Jordan hospitality tent, the motorhome, and Eddie Jordan was sat there, and I think he was with Ian Phillips, and Eddie started taking the piss, and I just said, "Eddie, watch your mouth, otherwise I'm going to chin you." I said, "You weren't up there." I said, "You don't know what happened." I said, "It was quite a hairy situation." And he says, "Well," he said, when are the trucks going to arrive?" And myself and Tim, we said, "It's not going to happen, Eddie." And they said, "No, no." He says, "Give me your best guess. When are the trucks going to arrive?" And we said, "It's not happening." So what we then had to do, and with my Yamaha people and that, we had to charter a small aircraft to get up to Milton Keynes, and we'd got spare computers, we got some spare engines back at the factory in Milton Keynes, and we had to get these shipped down to Magny-Cours. Unfortunately, we managed to get some equipment there. We managed to do the race, but my truck, I got parked up on the Tuesday, and we got it because it was a double header. It was Magny-Cours, then on to Silverstone. Well, my truck was still stuck there on the following Tuesday, and we had to fly another guy out to pick the truck up. And they let this truck go on the Tuesday morning, or the strikers did, and the strike sort of finished then. And we got it, he got it back up, Paul Nico, he got it back up to Silverstone. But 30 years ago, it was a bit of a thing, that was. And I believe that somebody told me that it had been on News at 10 back home and everything, and because, as I say, an F1 truck getting held up and not allowed to move, and then threatened to be set on fire, it was it was not the normal run of the mill things, but one of the more colourful events of my F1 career.